At the inheritance meeting in our Phoenix home, my son Ashton stood up like he owned the world, raised his beer, and delivered the words that still echo in my ears. "Sorry, Dad, but you get nothing. Walsh Construction is mine now." The room exploded in cheers and applause. His wife Tiffany squealed with joy. Even my own relatives were clapping like he'd just won the lottery. But I just stood there calm as an Arizona sunrise and said, "Not so fast, son. You forgot something important, didn't you?" That's when a woman stepped through the doorway, leaving the entire room in shock. Hold on, before I explain who walked through that door and changed everything, let me know in the comments which city you're watching from tonight. Because what happened next proves that sometimes the biggest surprises come from the people closest to us. Let me tell you about the day my son thought he'd inherit everything. The afternoon sun was beating down on our North Scottsdale home, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that Stephanie had refinished just 2 years before her accident. The whole Walsh clan was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins who hadn't spoken to each other since last Christmas, all crammed into our living room like sardines in a can. The air conditioning was working overtime, but you could still feel the tension thick as Arizona humidity in July. My son Ashton stood at the head of our dining room table, looking every bit the successful businessman in his pressed khakis and polo shirt. At 32, he had that confident swagger that comes from never having to wonder where your next meal's coming from. His wife Tiffany sat beside him, her manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse, that same expectant smile she wore whenever she thought money was about to change hands. "Well, everyone?" Ashton began tapping his beer bottle against the table, like he was calling a board meeting to order. "I know we're all still grieving Mom's loss." He paused for what I'm sure he thought was appropriate dramatic effect. But life goes on, and Walsh Construction needs leadership. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Uncle Ray nodded sagely from his spot on the couch. Cousin Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed she'd been checking her phone more than crying. Dad's been out of the construction game for 15 years now. Ashton continued shooting me a look that was probably meant to be sympathetic, but came off more like pity. And let's face it, at 58, he's not exactly ready to jump back into running a multi-million-dollar operation. More nods. Tiffany's smile grew wider. I could practically see dollar signs dancing in her eyes. So I'm proud to announce that Mom made the smart choice before she passed. Walsh Construction, all of it, is coming to me. He raised his beer bottle high. Here's to keeping it in the family and taking it to the next level. The room erupted like the 4th of July. Cheers, applause, someone even whistled. Uncle Ray slapped Ashton on the back hard enough to make him stumble. Tiffany jumped up and threw her arms around his neck, planting a kiss on his cheek that left a perfect lipstick print. Cousin Linda was already pulling out her phone to post about it on Facebook. I sat there in my old recliner, the same one Stephanie used to tease me about calling it my throne, and watched the whole circus unfold. Watched my son bask in congratulations he hadn't earned for an inheritance that wasn't his. Watched my family celebrate what they thought was a done deal. That's when I cleared my throat. The sound cut through the celebration like a buzzsaw through pine. Conversations died mid-sentence. Beer bottles froze halfway to lips. Even Tiffany's victory dance came to an abrupt halt. "Not so fast, son," I said, my voice calm as the desert morning. "You forgot something, didn't you?" The silence that followed could have stopped a jackhammer. 37 pairs of eyes turned toward me like I'd just announced aliens had landed in the backyard. Ashton's face went from triumph to confusion faster than a Phoenix temperature drop in January. "What are you talking about, Dad?" he asked. But I could hear something new in his voice now. Something that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Doubt. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to take you back to where it all began. Back to the day when everything I thought I knew about my place in this family got turned upside down. 15 years ago, I was Bradley Walsh head foreman at the biggest construction site in Scottsdale. Then everything changed in one afternoon. It was a Tuesday in March, perfect Arizona spring weather. I was up on the 3rd floor of what would become Scottsdale's newest luxury office complex, checking rebar placement before the concrete pour. 23 years in construction, never had so much as a twisted ankle. Should have known my luck was running out. The scaffolding gave way like a house of cards. One minute I was standing solid, the next I was falling 12 feet onto rebar and concrete blocks. The sound my back made when I hit, that's a sound you don't forget. Neither is feeling your legs go numb while coworkers shout for an ambulance. 3 surgeries and 6 months of physical therapy later, The doctors delivered their verdict. Mr. Walsh, you'll walk again, but construction work is off the table. One wrong move and you could end up in a wheelchair permanently. Just like that 23 years of building things with my hands was over. Stephanie was incredible during those months. While I was laid up feeling sorry for myself, she juggled her bookkeeping job, took care of 17-year-old Ashton, and basically ran our household. She'd come home exhausted, make dinner, help Ashton with homework, then sit by my bedside going over insurance paperwork until midnight. "We'll figure this out, Bradley," she'd say. "Maybe it's time for a change anyway." The change came fast. Walsh Construction, my small residential outfit, suddenly needed full-time attention. Insurance payouts gave us breathing room, but someone had to keep the business alive. "I can handle the books and client calls," Stephanie said one evening. "You can oversee projects from the truck, make sure crews do things right." What we didn't anticipate was how quickly Stephanie discovered her natural talent for business. Within 6 months, she'd landed 3 contracts I never would have pursued. Within a year, she was talking expansions and renovations that made my weekend jobs look like building sandcastles. And Ashton, suddenly, he was the man of the house. Not because I wasn't there, but because everyone treated him that way. Neighbors would nod toward Ashton and say, "Good thing you've got a strong son to help out." Stephanie's clients shook his hand, first assuming he was part of the business. I watched my roles shift like sand in an hourglass. Stephanie became the breadwinner, the decision-maker. Ashton became her right-hand man, the future everyone expected. And me, I became the guy who made breakfast, drove carpool, and stayed out of the way when real business was discussed. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't bitter. Stephanie had saved our family when I couldn't, but somewhere in that transition I stopped being Bradley Walsh, construction professional, and became Bradley Walsh, supportive husband. The worst part wasn't losing my career. It was watching Ashton learn that success comes easy when everyone expects you to succeed. Teachers gave him extra credit because his family was going through hard times. Coaches put him on varsity because his dad was injured. Even Stephanie started consulting 17-year-old Ashton on business decisions. What I didn't realize then was how quickly I'd go from being the breadwinner to being invisible in my own family, and how that invisibility would become the perfect position to see things others missed. Over the next decade, I watched from the sidelines as Stephanie built Walsh Construction into an empire. And I mean literally. I watched from the kitchen window while making coffee from the garage, folding laundry from the passenger seat, when Stephanie occasionally let me tag along to job sites. My new role as stay-at-home husband gave me a front-row seat to my wife's transformation from bookkeeper to Scottsdale's most sought-after general contractor. The growth was incredible. Weekend bathroom renovations became custom luxury homes in Paradise Valley. Small office repairs turned into massive commercial developments. By year 3, Walsh Construction had crews on 8 different projects. By year 5, Stephanie was turning down work because we couldn't keep up with demand. Our bank account reflected the success. The modest ranch house got a complete makeover. Granite countertops, stainless appliances, a master suite, bigger than our first apartment. Stephanie traded her beat-up Honda for a brand new Ford F-150. Even I got upgraded from generic groceries to Whole Foods. But the biggest change was in Ashton. At 22, fresh out of Arizona State, with a barely earned business degree, my son walked into Walsh Construction like he owned the place. Stephanie made him operations manager before his diploma was framed. Clients asked for young Walsh, specifically. Trade magazines featured articles about the next generation of Scottsdale builders. Ashton grew into his role like some kids grow into their father's clothes, quickly, confidently assuming everything would always fit perfectly. He'd roll up to job sites in his company truck, hard hat, positioned just so, clipboard in hand, like he'd been born holding one. The crews respected him because he was Stephanie's son, but more than that, they liked him. Ashton had inherited my ability to talk to workers and Stephanie's head for business. Meanwhile, I perfected being useful without getting in the way. I became the family's logistics coordinator, grocery shopping, meal planning, house maintenance. When Stephanie and Ashton came home exhausted from 12-hour days, dinner was ready, laundry done, house running like clockwork. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Bradley," Stephanie would say, kissing my cheek before diving into evening emails. She meant it, but there's a difference between being appreciated and being essential. I was appreciated like a reliable dishwasher, noticed most when something goes wrong. Family dinners told the whole story. Stephanie and Ashton spent an hour discussing projects budgets client meetings while I serve pot roast, and asked if anyone wanted seconds. I'd try contributing, suggest a supplier I'd worked with mention a time-saving technique, but conversation would pause politely, then continue as if I hadn't spoken. Ashton started bringing girlfriend Tiffany around more often. She was everything you'd expect from a girl targeting money. Beautiful, charming, laser-focused on business conversations. She'd ask about contracts and profit margins over dessert eyes lighting up when he mentioned lucrative projects. "You're so lucky," she'd tell him, squeezing his arm, "having this amazing family business just waiting for you." I may have been out of the construction business, but I still knew how to read numbers. And what I started seeing in those numbers worried me. It started with invoices left on the kitchen counter. Ashton was careless, and I still remembered how to spot inflated construction costs. The first one caught my eye on a Tuesday morning while I was cleaning up after breakfast. A receipt from Desert Stone Supply for $12,000 worth of flagstone for a simple backyard patio job in Fountain Hills. I'd been buying flagstone for 23 years. 12 grand would have been enough to pave half of Scottsdale. I told myself it was probably a typo. Desert Stone was a reputable outfit. I'd worked with them plenty of times before my accident. But something about the invoice bothered me. The formatting looked off. The paper stock felt different, and the signature at the bottom was barely legible. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to the paperwork that crossed our kitchen counter. Ashton had gotten into the habit of bringing invoices home to review. Over dinner, spreading them out next to his plate, like some people spread out magazines. He'd mutter about material costs and labor overruns, while Stephanie nodded approvingly at his attention to detail. What I saw made my stomach turn. A roofing job in Paradise Valley. $37,000 for materials that should have cost $15,000. Electrical work at a carefree mansion. $22,000 for wiring that any competent electrician could have done for $8,000. Plumbing supplies for a North Scottsdale renovation. $14,000 for fixtures I could have gotten wholesale for $4,000. The pattern was always the same. Legitimate suppliers, inflated quantities, prices that would make a highway robber blush. And every single invoice bore Ashton's signature as the approving manager. I started keeping my own records. Nothing fancy, just a composition notebook I kept hidden in the garage, tucked between old paint cans where nobody would think to look. Every suspicious invoice got logged with the date, supplier claimed cost, and what I estimated the real cost should have been. The numbers were staggering. In 18 months, I documented over $400,000 in what could only be systematic theft. Ashton wasn't just skimming, he was running a full-scale embezzlement operation, using Walsh Construction's reputation to legitimize fraudulent invoices, then pocketing the difference. The worst part was realizing how he was doing it. Craig Hoffman, our longtime materials coordinator, was processing these invoices in good faith. Craig had worked with us for 8 years. He trusted the Walsh family implicitly. When Ashton submitted an invoice with his signature, Craig paid it without question. Why wouldn't he? Ashton was the operations manager, Stephanie's son, the heir apparent to the whole business. Craig was being used as an unwitting accomplice to steal from the company he'd helped build. I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out where the money was going. Ashton's lifestyle had certainly improved. The new truck, the expensive dinners with Tiffany, the weekend trips to Las Vegas that he called networking opportunities. But $400,000 was serious money, even for someone living beyond their means. Then I started noticing other things. The way Ashton would get defensive when Stephanie asked detailed questions about specific projects. How he'd change the subject when Craig mentioned discrepancies in material deliveries. The nervous laugh he'd give when clients complained about higher than expected costs. My son wasn't just stealing from the family business. He was stealing from clients, from suppliers, from everyone who trusted the Walsh name. And he was doing it with the kind of systematic precision that suggested this wasn't some recent desperate grab for cash. This was a long-term strategy. I had two choices: confront Ashton directly and watch him lie his way out of it, or tell the one person who could actually do something about it. The night I showed Stephanie the evidence, I expected anger. What I got was something much more calculated. I waited until after dinner, after Ashton left, for one of his client meetings that probably involved more bourbon than blueprints. Stephanie was in her home office laptop, open reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when I knocked my composition notebook tucked under my arm. "We need to talk," I said. 20 minutes later, she'd gone through every page of documentation. Her face stayed neutral as she absorbed the numbers, the patterns, the systematic nature of what our son had been doing. When she finished, she closed the notebook and sat back. 400,000, she said quietly. In 18 months. That's just what I could document from invoices that came through the house. There's probably more. She nodded, then opened her laptop and started typing. What are you doing? Checking our business account activity for the same period. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who'd built a company from scratch. If Ashton's been this systematic, there should be corresponding deposits that don't match our actual project completions. I watched my wife transform back into the sharp businesswoman who'd saved our family 15 years earlier. This wasn't Stephanie, the grieving mother. This was Stephanie Walsh, CEO, identifying a threat and formulating a response. There, she said, pointing at the screen. Every fraudulent invoice you documented corresponds to a cash deposit within 72 hours. He's not just stealing from us, Bradley. He's laundering money through our business accounts. The scope hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't petty cash skimming. This was sophisticated financial fraud that could destroy Walsh Construction and land us in federal prison. We have to confront him, I said. Stephanie shook her head. If we confront him now, he'll deny everything. Destroy evidence, maybe pin it on Craig. We need to be smarter. What are you suggesting? We set a trap, but first we protect the business. The next morning, Stephanie called Marcus Whitman, the corporate attorney, who'd guided Walsh Construction through major expansions. If we were going to outmaneuver Ashton, we needed someone who understood both business law and criminal liability. Mr. Whitman listened with professional calm. When we finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. Your son has committed multiple felonies. Wire fraud, money laundering, possibly racketeering. But proving it in court will be difficult if he's covered his tracks. What do you recommend? Stephanie asked. Document everything, but don't tip your hand. And protect your assets immediately. If this becomes criminal, prosecutors might freeze business accounts. You need clear ownership of legitimate assets first. That's when Stephanie made the decision that changed everything. Transfer the business to Bradley, all of it. Make him sole owner of record. Mr. Whitman raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. Bradley discovered the fraud. He's got clean hands. If Ashton claims he was acting on company authority, it needs to be crystal clear he never had that authority. The paperwork took 3 weeks. Trust documents, ownership transfers, corporate restructuring, all done quietly, all filed with appropriate agencies, all completely legal and binding. We had our plan in place. All we needed was time. Unfortunately, fate had other ideas. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Stephanie's car had gone off the mountain road during her business trip to Flagstaff. I was making coffee when the phone rang, still in my bathrobe, thinking about the grocery list I needed to write. The voice belonged to a highway patrol officer whose name I immediately forgot. Mr. Walsh. This is about your wife, Stephanie Walsh. There's been an accident on Route 17 about 30 miles south of Flagstaff. Her vehicle went through the guardrail during last night's storm. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. I stared at the mess, trying to process words that felt like they were coming from underwater. Is she... We found the vehicle at the bottom of a ravine this morning, extensively damaged. We haven't located Mrs. Walsh yet, but search and rescue teams are on scene. The next 72 hours blurred together like a fever dream. Ashton rushed home, his face a mask of shock and concern that looked genuine enough to fool everyone except me. Tiffany hovered nearby, making sympathetic noises while her eyes darted around like she was calculating something. Search and rescue teams combed the mountainside for 3 weeks. Helicopters, dogs, community volunteers. Everyone looking for a woman who wasn't there to be found. Local news ran stories about the devoted wife and successful businesswoman who'd vanished in the storm. After 21 days, the search was called off. Stephanie Walsh was presumed dead, another victim of Arizona's treacherous mountain highways during monsoon season. I played the grieving widower perfectly. Showed up at meetings, signed papers, accepted condolences with appropriate gratitude and devastation. After 15 years of being invisible in my own family, I'd gotten good at showing people what they expected to see. But Ashton's performance was what really caught my attention. He grieved publicly with soap opera drama. Tears at appropriate moments, angry outbursts about losing his mother too young, touching speeches about carrying on her legacy. The family ate it up. Relatives praised him for being strong, mature, ready to step up when the family needed leadership. What they didn't see were the moments when he thought nobody was watching. The way his eyes would light up when someone mentioned the business. The barely suppressed smile when Uncle Ray talked about young Walsh taking over. The calculating look whenever conversation turned to inheritance. 3 months after Stephanie's death, Ashton started making subtle changes at Walsh Construction. New business cards with his name in larger font. Client meetings where he positioned himself as the company's future. Strategic conversations about expansion that were really just ways to establish himself as natural successor. He brought Tiffany to company events, introducing her as his fiancée and letting her charm clients with talk about their shared vision for Walsh Construction's future. She played the part beautifully, the devoted partner ready to support the next generation. As we planned the memorial service, I could see it in Ashton's eyes. He thought he'd won the lottery. If only he knew what was coming. The memorial was beautiful. Stephanie would have appreciated the flowers' heartfelt speeches, the way the construction community honored her memory. I delivered a eulogy that made half the congregation cry, talking about the woman who'd built an empire and the legacy she'd left behind. Ashton spoke too, his voice breaking at all the right moments, as he promised to honor his mother's vision and keep the family business strong. The applause that followed sounded like a coronation, which brings us back to that family meeting where Ashton thought he was about to become the king of Walsh Construction. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Ashton's face had gone from confident to confused to panicked in 30 seconds. Tiffany's fingers gripped her purse so tight her knuckles went white. "What are you talking about, Dad?" Ashton repeated, but his voice had lost that cocky edge. Now he sounded like the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, thick enough to choke a horse. Maybe Mr. Whitman should explain this. Marcus Whitman stepped forward from the window, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with practiced calm. He took the folder and opened it with reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying 40 years of legal authority. "There's been a fundamental misunderstanding about Walsh Construction's ownership." Ashton shot to his feet. "What misunderstanding? Mom left everything to me. We talked about it dozens of times." Mr. Whitman pulled out the first document, a transfer form bearing official seals and notary stamps. 18 months ago, Mrs. Stephanie Walsh executed a complete transfer of all business assets to her husband Bradley Walsh. This was recorded with the Arizona Corporation Commission, the IRS, and all relevant banking institutions. The room erupted like someone had thrown a match into a gas tank. "That's impossible," Ashton shouted. "She never told me about any transfer." Uncle Ray leaned forward. "What does this mean exactly?" Mr. Whitman held up his hand for silence. "Mr. Bradley Walsh has been the sole owner of Walsh Construction for 18 months. There are no business assets in Mrs. Stephanie Walsh's estate to distribute." Tiffany made a sound like a deflating balloon. Relatives started talking at once, but Ashton's voice cut through the chaos like a chainsaw. "You're lying. This is fraud. Mom was sick. She didn't know what she was signing." I stood up, my knees creaking like old floorboards, and looked my son straight in the eye. "Your mother knew exactly what she was signing, Ashton. Just like she knew exactly why she was signing it." "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out my composition notebook. "It means we found out about the $400,000 you stole from the company. Every fake invoice, every inflated bill, every penny you skimmed from clients who trusted the Walsh name." The color drained from Ashton's face faster than water down a storm drain. Tiffany stepped back from him like he'd caught fire. That's not... I never... "Desert Stone Supply," I said, opening the notebook. $12,000 for flagstone that should have cost $4. Carefree Electric, $22,000 for work any electrician could do for $8. Should I keep going? Mr. Whitman cleared his throat. The transfer was executed to protect the business from potential criminal liability. Mrs. Walsh wanted to ensure Walsh Construction could continue operating regardless of any legal consequences her son might face. Ashton was screaming about fraud, about impossible timing, about his dead mother. That's when Mr. Whitman said the words that stopped everyone cold. "There's someone here who can explain this better than I can." The door opened, and the woman everyone thought was dead walked into the room. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was air conditioning humming and a neighbor's dog barking. Then Ashton made a noise I'd never heard before. Something between a gasp and a scream, like he'd been punched by a ghost. "Mom!" The word came out barely a whisper. Stephanie stood in the doorway, looking every bit the successful businesswoman she'd always been. Her hair was shorter, dyed different, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had built Walsh Construction from nothing. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself with quiet confidence of someone who'd just won the longest con in Arizona history. "Hello, Ashton," she said, stepping into the room. "Surprised to see me?" Tiffany's scream could have shattered windows. She scrambled backwards so fast, she knocked over her chair designer purse, spilling across the floor. "You're dead. We went to your funeral." Stephanie's smile was colder than a Flagstaff winter. "You saw them lower an empty casket. Amazing what a funeral director will do when you show them evidence of felony embezzlement." Ashton was hyperventilating, his face cycling through colors like a mood ring. "This isn't real. You died. Your car went off the mountain. They searched for a woman who was never there," Stephanie said, walking to the head of the table where Ashton had been standing. "I was in Tucson the whole time, staying with my sister, watching news reports about my own death." Uncle Ray found his voice. "Why would you do this?" Stephanie opened her briefcase and began spreading documents across the table. Bank statements, fraudulent invoices, deposit slips, email printouts. The evidence we'd gathered for 18 months laid out like a prosecutor's dream. "Because my son stole $400,000 from the family business," she said. "Because he was systematically defrauding our clients' suppliers and employees. Because he was using our name to commit felonies that could have destroyed everything I'd built." Ashton lunged for the documents, but I caught his arm. For a man sitting in a recliner 15 years, I still had a construction worker's grip. "Every invoice is documented," Stephanie continued. "Every fake receipt, every inflated bill, every penny you stole. We have bank records showing when and where you deposited the money. We have testimony from suppliers. We have everything, Ashton." "You set me up," he whispered. "No," I said, releasing his arm. "We caught you. There's a difference." That's when Tiffany made her move. She snatched her purse keys already in hand and headed for the door without a backward glance. "I can't do this. I can't be part of this family anymore." The front door slammed with the finality of a coffin lid. Ashton watched his fiancée abandon him, then turned back to face parents who'd risen from the dead to destroy his life. His shoulders sagged like a building losing its foundation. "What happens now?" he asked, sounding like my little boy again. "Now you face the consequences," Stephanie said. "The FBI has copies of everything. Your lawyer will need to be very good." As the dust settled and the family scattered, relatives fleeing like the house was on fire, mister. Whitman gathering papers with professional efficiency. Ashton sat alone in that room, finally understanding what he'd lost. 6 months later, I'm watching my son learn what I learned 15 years ago, how to start over from nothing. It's 7 in the morning, and I'm sitting in my truck outside a Tempe construction site, watching Ashton load rebar into a wheelbarrow. His hands are calloused from 6 months of real work, his back bent under steel he used to order others to carry. The designer polo shirts are gone, replaced by work boots and a hard hat that's actually seen use. He lost everything just like Stephanie promised. The FBI investigation led to federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. His lawyer negotiated a plea deal that kept him out of prison in exchange for full restitution and 5 years probation. But prison might have been easier. Tiffany was gone before the arrest warrant dried. She took the ring, the bank account, every piece of furniture, left him a note. "I can't be with someone who lies about everything." Can't blame her. The fancy condo got foreclosed, the company truck repossessed. Even his golf clubs ended up in a pawn shop for legal fees. Now he's living in a studio apartment near the airport walls, so thin you hear your neighbor's TV through the bathroom. But here's the thing, he shows up every day. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have bet on Ashton lasting 6 days doing manual labor. But every morning at 6:30, he's on site with lunch packed in a paper bag, ready to do whatever needs doing. The crew foreman Martinez told me something interesting last week. "Your boy's got potential. Doesn't complain, doesn't think he's too good for dirty work. Give him a couple years, he might make a decent construction worker." Coming from Martinez, that's high praise. Stephanie and I drive by job sites, sometimes just to check on him. Not to interfere, just to see how he's handling earning every dollar the hard way. She's back running Walsh Construction, and business has never been better. Turns out when you're not skimming $400,000 yearly in fraudulent expenses, profit margins improve dramatically. We hired Craig Hoffman as operations manager. He was devastated learning how Ashton used him, but he's thrown himself into making sure it never happens again. Every invoice gets double-checked, every supplier verified. Walsh Construction's reputation is stronger than ever. As for Ashton and us, we don't talk much. He's not ready for forgiveness, and we're not ready to pretend everything's fine. But I see something new in him. Humility, work ethic, understanding that respect must be earned, not inherited. Last week I watched him help an older worker struggling with a heavy beam. 6 months ago, Ashton would have stood there checking his phone. Now he jumps in without being asked, gets his hands dirty, takes pride in doing the job right. Maybe it'll stick. Maybe in a few years we'll sit around the same dinner table again talking about projects like a normal family. Maybe Ashton will find someone who loves him for who he's becoming, not what he used to own. Or maybe he'll fall back into old habits when things get easier. I don't know. That's up to him now. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child isn't what they want. It's what they need to become who they're supposed to be. Looking back at this true story, I realize I made mistakes that nearly cost me my family. For 15 years, I let myself become invisible, thinking that staying quiet was the same as keeping peace. Don't be like me. Don't wait until your family's falling apart to speak up. The lesson I learned the hard way is this: sometimes love means setting boundaries, even when it hurts. God gave us wisdom not to stay silent, but to protect what matters most. When I discovered Ashton's theft, I could have confronted him directly and watched him lie his way out. Instead, Stephanie and I chose the harder path, one that required patience, planning, and faith that justice would prevail. These grandpa stories teach us that family loyalty doesn't mean enabling bad behavior. True story. I spent years thinking I was being a good father by staying out of the way, but I was actually teaching my son that actions don't have consequences. God blessed me with the strength to finally stand up, but I wish I'd found that courage sooner. The grandpa stories our generation passes down should be about courage, not compromise. This true story shows that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone you care about face the consequences of their choices. God doesn't promise that doing the right thing will be easy. He promises it will be worth it. That's why I share these grandpa stories, so the next generation learns from our mistakes instead of repeating them. Don't make my mistakes. Don't wait 15 years to find your voice. Don't let family members destroy what generations have built, just because confronting them feels uncomfortable. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below and let me know what family lesson you wish you'd learned sooner. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that matter. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the hardest truths.